another Garry's Mod and Combine Half-Life 2 lore video. And in this video, as I said in the previous video, we will be focusing on the problem, the corruption within civil protection, and specifically the amount of resistance spies and anti-citizens that join the civil protection purely to provide intelligence for the resistance. Now, even though this technically is not vanilla or whatever, except Barney, or already it is, it is vanilla clearly, because Barney Calhoun is the perhaps best example of that. But as we see in games such as Entropy Zero Uprising, which I'm using the map of for this video to fit the thematic as well, we see that the resistance corruption of civil protection, the Combine Metro Cops, is actually a much more serious topic than just one anomaly such as Calhoun, working undercover with civil protection and the rebels at the same time, and obviously being on the rebels side, right? So what exactly is the reason for that? Now I would say the biggest reason for that is the civil protection is really open to anyone. Now there is a very good strategic reason for that. The Combine is aware that the civil protection is purely meant as a metropolitan law enforcement organization. It's not a military organization, it's basically the Combine's police force, right? They're responsible for much less dangerous stuff than the transhuman arm. What I mean by this, their purpose is to just kinda shoot down anti-citizens or rebels within Combine cities, and they are unmodified humans as well, which, it's really meant to, the reason why they're unmodified is that, first of all, it's supposed to be basically a quite low-tier combative formation of the Combine, so first of all, and second of all, it is supposed to attract people who want to serve the Combine without undergoing the permanent transhumanization process like the Overwatch soldiers experience. So, obviously the Combine also probably wouldn't really want to waste time and resources on a fundamentally very disposable combative force, such as the civil protection. Now, the civil protection is important for the Combine. It is obviously very, very important for them, because it is what keeps the citizens and cities in check without having to constantly deploy the transhuman military everywhere, which can therefore be allocated to much more important tasks than just beating up anti-citizens, And it also is supposed to be a way to get people's sympathy, because obviously the average person that doesn't really understand or care about the Combine in the first place would not really want to be a transhuman armed soldier, right? They would much rather, in their own eyes, even though I disagree with that stance, they would much rather in their own eyes retain their humanity and be a purely human collaborator. But what happens when you don't modify someone? That's right. They retain the worst of the worst of any biological species. Instincts. And subconscious, irrational, yes, irrational behavior. And what does that lead to? Well, of course it leads to rebellion. Just like we see with resistance members, which are purely governed by their own sloppy, biological, whatever. The unmodified combine combat personnel, such as the civil protection, is usually victim of the same thing. They sometimes let instincts overshadow their better judgment and logic, and they start cooperating with something as destructive as the resistance. Along with that, the bar to enter the civil protection is quite low. Once again, it's not meant to be any prestigious force, it's once again supposed to be frontline police, quite disposable. So, really all you need is just be at least on the outside loyal to the Combine, even though, for example, in Entropy 02, even when at the start of the game you're in the civil protection base and you get to talk to the other Metro Cops, right? You can see that a lot of them aren't really loyal to the Combine and joined purely for self-interest, for selfish reasons. But as long as they don't really make that known, obviously the Combine, first of all, has really no way of knowing unless they would like scan their minds or whatever, if that is possible. And second of all, the Combine also probably doesn't really care in the first place, since most CPs are completely unexperienced civilians that if they would try to rebel even with the weapons they're issued, the Combine would have pretty much no issues putting them out. So, even though this is obviously a pretty logical logistics, stance, because obviously you probably don't really want to waste too much resources on something that's probably isn't even loyal to you in the first place. Or like half the on an organization whose half members are not even loyal to in the first place. And also has the danger of a larger group of deserters and anti-citizens operating within the civil protection to organize some sort of uprising against you, or a rebellion. And I mean really that is what happened with some of the Metro Cops we see in Entropy Zero Uprising when you fight them. They clearly aren't really on your side. They clearly defected from the Combine, and also if you choose to stay loyal to the Combine in Entropy Zero Uprising, you're essentially nearly killed by them, when they shoot at you from behind, yes. I'm pretty sure it is. I did finish Entropy Zero Uprising, I already finished it, so yeah. So to kind of sum it up, the biggest issue is that unmodified. Now obviously that is also one of the reasons that the Combine does push a lot of the civil protection officers, or at least the decent performing ones, and try to get them transhumanized as soon as possible so they don't stagnate too much as humans and therefore have also lesser chance of rebelling against the Combine. But, you know, it also has to do with not only them being unmodified, but the entry bar being set low, which honestly isn't really, you know, it isn't really surprising because once again, as I said, the civil protection is much less important for the Combine than the Overwatch soldiers, which are like their main force. Basically, the civil protection is purely meant for metropolitan city, you know, like Combine law and order enforcement. They're not really meant for any high-tier combat operations. And I mean, their training is usually quite low, unless they were some, like, former soldiers or cops or any sort of, like, profession that had some sort of combat training. Unless they're that, they're mostly just random citizens that joined. Obviously, they do receive some sort of combat training, but it's usually just, like, basics, like, you know, because they don't really need anything else, really. And therefore, if they're unskilled, they also don't really pose that much of a threat anyways, as we have seen in Entropy's Uprising. Most of the resistance metro cops are actually quite easy to put down, because they don't really have any training at all. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say, and yeah, that's all I wanted to say really, and thanks for watching.